Hello and welcome to Mekelle Foresight, and this is Mekelle, producer and host of the show. The term of the federal government expires in few days according to the constitution. Also expiring is the term of office of the regional governments, of course, except Tigrai, which held its own elections based on the constitution and just formed a government. With me today on Mekelle Foresight is Amanuel Assefa, who is head of Tigrai's Bureau of Justice, to update us on the developments. Amanuel Assefa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here.
So we can start with the newly elected government of Tigray. How significant is this election, this forming of a new government for Tigray, and what message does it send to the rest of the country?
The federal government or the federal regime who snatched power before 2 years was consistently violating the constitution. The regime has no any interest to conduct an election in this country. But because of the pressure by different political forces in the country, tried to pretend that election will be held. He said that there are countries who didn't conduct an election for 20 or 30 years. He wanted to take an example of Isaias Afwerki. Unfortunately, the friends of the Prime Minister at this time are the governments who didn't know election and democratic way of holding power. You can take the United Arab Emirates, you can take the Saudi Arabia, you can take Somalia. Most of the autocratic regimes are the friends of him. The federal government used coronavirus as a pretext to postpone an election. Then the federal government was in need of any legal way to postpone the election. Then,
was there any legal way?
It's not a legal way, but there are sometimes if you want to violate laws, you enact laws. That's legal violation of laws. Then under the guise of interpretation of the constitution, election was postponed for infinite period of time. When the people and the government of Tigray decided to conduct an election, the federal government intimidated the people to wage a kind of war. But the people said, under any circumstances, the election will not be stopped. The election is as significant as self-determination. It is as significant as self-rule. It is as significant as constitutionalism, as significant as maintaining the purpose of the sacrifice that the people of Tigray paid for. Having a legitimate and constitutional government is a kind of foundation stone for political, economic, and democratic development. Even in maintaining developmental democratic state, this type of election, the election held by the people, is very, very significant. It has also a message for the federal government. The people shown that the right for self-determination cannot be compromised under any circumstances. The people boldly told the federal government that anything about Tigray is in the hands of the people. Another message to the nations, nationalities, and peoples of the country: unity, determination, and maintaining organizations, national organizations, is very, very important to self-determination. This election and formation of government conveys a message for other countries like Eritrea. The people of Eritrea paid a lot for freedom. But for the last 30 years, the people are under authoritarian regime. They paid a lot for freedom, but they are not free still. So the brothers and sisters in the Eritrea, the people of Eritrea, can learn a lot from the people of Tigray. And this election can convey a message for other countries in the Horn of Africa. That the countries in the Horn of Africa are not lucky to have democratic governments. You can go to Somalia, which was stateless for about 2 decades and something. You can see the Sudan, the South Sudan, Eritrea.
So the federal government's term of office will expire in a few days.
Yeah.
First week of October.
Yeah.
So what will happen after that?
After the expiry of the regime, for me, the country will be stateless, which means the House of People's Representatives cannot enact laws and cannot exercise the mandates given by the Constitution to them. The executive organ or the Council of Ministers cannot execute laws, cannot pass decisions. The House of Federation, for example, cannot interpret the Constitution and cannot exercise other mandates given to it by the Constitution. The Prime Minister or other political power holders cannot exercise the power given to them by other laws, by the Constitution and other laws. For example, the Prime Minister cannot command the defense forces. So there will be power vacuum. So the power holders, the regimes at the federal level and the regions will try to stay in power using military force. So it shows me, it tells me that the democratic and constitutional way of holding power will be changed to kind of holding power using force.
But you said the Prime Minister cannot, for instance, command the armed forces.
Yeah,
How will he be able to use force then?
Yeah, even though he cannot legally legally command the defense force and the other military organs, just he will illegally command the command force.
And the military is supposed to uphold the constitution, which provides for elections every 5 years.
Yeah, we expect like that. And as you remember, the federalist forces call upon the constitutional institutions to maintain and to safeguard the constitution. So what I'm saying is the political, the regime in power will try to stay and enforce its decisions using military forces, but we don't know what will happen.
So it will be kind of military rule.
Yeah, it's kind of military rule, but the defense forces have also constitutional mandate to safeguard the constitution and not to accept any command from unconstitutional government.
The regional state of Tigray, because it's an elected government already established. So how will it deal with the federal government and also with the regional governments whose term will expire soon?
When I say the regime will expire on October 5, it means that the political power held by the federal government will not be exercised legally. But it doesn't mean that the public office, public institutions will not be function. It doesn't mean they will not be function. We have public institutions which do not depend upon the term office of the regime.
Like
Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, any ministry office, institutional relationship with the federal institutions, institutional relationship region to region will continue. Because public service is a service to be delivered to the people. It doesn't depend and it shouldn't depend on the term office of the political officers, but unless it is obstructed by the federal government.
Do you envisage that this may happen?
You cannot predict what will happen by the federal government because the federal government is very frustrated because it knows that it's not legal. The deputy chief of staff tried to declare that no one can resist the power of the regime even after October 5, he said.
Is this any indication that the army may still receive orders from the Prime Minister?
I cannot conclude that the army as a whole will support the federal government, but some of the generals may support to the federal government to save their interests. But when you take the defense forces as a whole, they are from the whole nations and nationalities of the country. And the federal government, the regime at the federal government is against the interests of the nations and nationalists of the country. So it will be difficult. The members of the defense forces will support the regime against the interest of the nations and nationalities, because you cannot shoot your mother, you cannot destroy, you cannot fire against your people, and you will not win. So it will be difficult to conclude, to imagine, not to conclude, even to imagine the defense force will beside of the federal government.
Foreign affairs and diplomacy is also constitutionally mandated. Yeah. Will the federal government be dealing with foreign governments, and how should foreign governments deal with a government that has no legitimacy of its people?
Yeah, if you say the term of office of a federal, the government is expired, it means that the government cannot represent the country. So diplomacy is about representation of a country. The government will have no any power to represent the country, to conclude any agreement. And if any agreement is concluded by this regime, it will have no any effect. By the way, for the last 2 years, the agreements were being concluded by the federal government were not transparent. None of them are delivered to the House of People's Representatives for approval. So the international community and the international organizations should be aware that the government cannot represent the country, cannot conclude any agreement, and should enforce him to come to the table and save the country.
Pressurize the government.
They should pressure, yeah. They should pressure him. And there are also international agreements and the United Nations Charter that they do not allow any authoritarian government in any state.
There are authoritarian governments which are members of the UN.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. But they are not as such accepted and legitimate. They are not. Authoritarian governments may be tolerated for some cases based on the interests of each nation, but the international community does not help them.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, he rose to power on the back of popular uprisings in Oromia, Amhara, and some other parts of the country. And there were popular demands for more autonomy, more self-administration. So what we are seeing now of the Prime Minister's actions, isn't it contrary to his constituency, what he calls his base, social base?
Of course, he has no any social base. This is a kind of behavior of populist leaders. Populist leaders pretend to show that they are committed to solve problems of the people, but actually not. Most of the demands, for example, being raised by Cairo around Oromia, were for more employment, for good governance, for more loose federalism, for autonomous Oromia. Now it's forgotten, yeah, totally forgotten. Cannot talk about that. Not only they ignore the questions, they tried. I mean, they are trying to suppress the people who ask us this type of questions. You can see the case of Oromia at this time. Oromia is at this time center of human and democratic rights violation. Oromia at this time is center of prisoners of its youngsters. Oromia at this time is a kind of hell. The users are being killed anywhere. Oromia at this time is a place of disorder. The people of Oromia cannot express their ideas, their interests. They cannot assemble.
Those who oppose the Prosperity Party's plans to dismantle the relatively broader regional autonomy enshrined in the Ethiopian constitution brand the federalists as violent ethno-nationalists bent on destroying democracy and Ethiopia's unity. Are such federalist forces really a threat to democracy and Ethiopia's unity?
Ethiopia is not a nation. It's a place of nations and nationalities. So a multi-nationalist state. But the regime in power wants us to build a nation. This was a model used for 100 years before 1991. After Menelik came to power, he tried to assimilate all the nations and nationalities into one pot. Then the successive regimes until Derg were trying to build the country with a sentiment, with kind of one sentiment, one nation, one language, kind of one religion, and they want to hold the unity of the country with this sentiment. The nations and nationalities were being oppressed, but they were fighting for many years, for decades, to bring equality. Finally, the final guard of that sentiment was fallen. And at that time, in 1991, Ethiopia was at the verge of disintegration because of inequality of nations and nationalities. EPRDF and the parties at that time saved the country by adopting a constitution that accommodates equality of nations and nationalities. About 27 years, the Prosperity Party came to power. And the sentiment of the 100 years entered Arat Kilo. Now, the regime wants to restructure the country with a unitary structural setup. The people, the nations and nationalists of the country need equal accommodation. They want for self-determination. They want for self-governance. They want an autonomous power. They want to be holders of autonomous power in their regions, regional status. You can take, for example, Sidama. They were in need of the establishment of their regional status. And you can take, for example, Walaita at this time. They are fighting to have their own national state. And you can take many other nations. I mean, for example, you can take the Kamant nationality. Many nations and nationalities in this country are now in need of self-government and self-determination. But the regime at the center is in contradictory sentiment to this needs. The federal forces are representing the need of the people, as I have said, for very loose federalism, for self-determination, for self-governance, for autonomous governments in the regional status, and the federal government is in need of a unitary kind of structure, state structure. So it is right to consider for him that these federal forces are challenges for the project.
So can we say Ethiopia, since the establishment of the Prosperity Party, is still a federation?
Actually not. It's not a federation at this time. Because federalism is about self-determination. It is about self-rule. It is about power sharing. It's about autonomous regional status. But at this time, when you take the case of regional states, for example, they are snatched their power by the federal government to elect their governments. All the presidents in all regional states except Tigray are sent and assigned by the federal government. Look, they are not the representatives of the people. They are not represented by the people. They are represented by the federal government, by the central government. And you can take that all the regional states are at this time under military command. command posts. There are command posts everywhere at this time. This type of command post is not known by any law in Ethiopia. The constitution doesn't know command post.
There was command post even during the time of the PRDF.
Yeah, if there is a state of emergency declared by the House of People's Representatives for some reason, there may be. But now there is no state of emergency, but there are command posts everywhere. Another thing, federalism is about parliamentarism. Look, the parliaments in the federal level, at the federal level, are being used as instruments of the people, the Prosperity Party. If they want to interpret the constitution illegally, they use it. When they want to enact oppressing laws, they use. For example, the constitutional power of the House of Federation was snatched by a commission established by the House of People's Representatives. So there is no parliament, real parliament at this time. Federalism is about democracy. The people in the regional status have the right to decide anything about political power. For example, you can take election. Election is a kind of touchstone for democracy. The nationalists, nationalists, and peoples in the regions cannot decide about themselves. They cannot elect their governments.
How was that possible without amending or changing the constitution? Can we have a proof of life of the constitution now?
No, we cannot. When we talk about constitution, we talk about the principles of the constitution. Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopian Constitution has 5 basic pillars. The first pillar is about sovereignty of the people. The nations, nationalists, and peoples are the sole and ultimate power holders. Political power can be exercised by a government, for example, if it is represented by the people. But at this time, you can see that election cannot be assumed. Political power is snatched by some people. The second basic principle or pillar of the constitution is supremacy of the constitution. Among the main points of supremacy of the constitution, any law, decision, customary practice contravening the constitution shall be of no effect, it says. But at this time, you can see all the decisions which are being made by the federal government. You can see many laws that contravene the constitution. I have tried to mention, for example, the proclamation established the Commission of Border Administration, something like that. You can see the decision given by the House of Federation to postpone election for an indefinite time. All these things are contravening the constitution. And another thing in this principle is that political power cannot be held without real representation of the people, without election in its real sense. But the regime in power at this time stayed in power without election for 40 years and now illegally extended its power. The third important principle in the constitution is about protection of human and democratic rights. At this time in Ethiopia, the right movement is totally stopped. The right to life. Anyone who doesn't accept the order of the command posts can be killed. And there is no justice. The right to express one's idea is prohibited. Look about the mass media. The right to elect and vote the right to vote and be elected. One of the important democratic rights is now prohibited. If you count all the rights, the human and democratic rights stipulated in the Constitution, you cannot find any provision that was not violated by the federal government. Another important principle is about separation of state and religion. The federal government tries to intervene in the religious affairs under the guise of negotiation. If he wants, he brings a leader from somewhere, from America or something, tactically assigns leaders of the religions, and he has, I mean, for example, the Prime Minister has a representative of the religions, I mean, representative of, for example, an Orthodox church in his office. If he wants to disturb, he sends them. Fifth pillar is about transparency and accountability of government affairs. The decisions of the government at this time, all the conducts of the government at this time are hidden. Let alone the ordinary people, the nations, nationals, and peoples of the country. The members of the House of Representatives have no any clue about what's happening by the government. As I have tried to mention earlier on, any international agreement signed by the federal government should be adopted, should be approved by the House of People's Representatives. But yet, I mean, so far, for the last 2 years, we haven't seen any international agreement approved by the House of People's Representatives. We hear about loans, we hear about aids, we hear about agreements by the social media, but none of them are clearly, transparently brought to the people and adopted by the concerned organ. The constitution is not viable at this time.
The Prosperity Party has recently announced that it is trying, together with political parties in Oromia and Amhara, to amend the constitution. Is it possible to do that while its days are numbered?
It's not possible. Look, parties from 2 regions agreed to amend the constitution. Look, the sentiment in Arat Kilo, the majoritarian sentiment.
And the Oromara kind of...
Yeah, the Oromara kind of unholy marriage. The constitution says, the constitution itself is an agreement of the peoples, I mean the nations, nationals, and peoples of the country. If any provision is needed to be amended, all the nations and nationals, peoples of the country should agree on that. And any proposal for amendment should pass through the House of Federation and be agreed or be supported by the regional states. But now, with a unitary sentiment in Arat Kilo, they want to amend, they told clearly, boldly told us that they want to amend the constitution. This is one of the project for unitary state structure. And they are telling us that other nations and nationalities are not concerned about the constitution. The constitution is not an agreement of 2 regions. It's not an agreement of 2 parties or parties from 2 regions. It's an agreement of the nations, nationals, and peoples.
Okay, many agree that removing authoritarian regime or even holding elections is not necessarily directly translated into having democratic government. What needs to happen for Ethiopia to avoid a relapse to authoritarianism as we can see today?
Ethiopia came to this level by Prosperity Party. So if Ethiopia should be saved, negotiation among the political forces should be undertaken. The nations and peoples should be given an opportunity to talk about it. And representatives from the nations, nationalities, and peoples should come to form a caretaker government.
Not from the political parties, but from the representatives of the people.
The political parties cannot save the country at this time because they have divergent interests. These divergent interests can be compromised if a neutral kind of taker government is implemented. So I think this is the way out for the country.
Coming back to Tigray elections that were held recently, the TPLF, the ruling party, won 189 of the 190 seats.
Yeah.
Only one seat went to one of the opposition parties. What do you say to those who have this fear or this apprehension that we may be in for a kind of election without democracy?
An election is said to be democratic, not because of its result. It is said to be democratic mainly on the process. The government of Tigray has committed to make participate the political parties and expand the political space of Tigray, taking main initiatives. As you know, the federal constitution and the state constitution is in support of majoritarian. The provisions in the constitution or the constitution is with a majoritarian electoral system, first past or post, yeah. But TPLF or the government led by TPLF decided political parties in Tigray should have the chance, should have the opportunity to participate in the parliament. To do so, the majoritarian approach may not give chance to them. And the government decided the voice of the minority should be heard, should be represented. But the majoritarian kind of electoral system doesn't mean that it's not democratic. Many countries with advanced democracies use majoritarian electoral system. You can take, for example, USA. Still, they use the majoritarian one. So, majoritarian is a kind of electoral system adopted to expand democracy by itself. But the government believed or convinced that there may be some minority voters which cannot be represented in the House of People, in the council. So the government took such kind of commitment to amend the constitution, adopted a proclamation which can give an opportunity to participate the political parties. You can take the pre-election period, how the parties share the resources, how they share the airtime in the media. Yeah. And not only that, as you know, the political parties in Tigray, except TPLF, have no full certification by the electoral board of the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia. But the government decided if the parties have a preliminary certificate for to be political parties, they have to compete, they have to participate in the electoral process, in the election. This is another extra mile commitment took by the government. It has its own cost, we know. But the political parties in Tigray were not certified by the regime in the federal at the center, it was not because of they didn't fulfill the requirements. When the regime decided to postpone the election, parties which are not certified were assumed to support the postponement of the election. Why? Because if they are not certified, they will not have the chance to participate in the election, yeah? So we believe that this is another conspiracy. So they have to get the chance to participate. If the people decided that these political parties should lead even the government, we committed to give them anything. We also decided to give any support to the political parties. It was not because the political parties have the right. It is because the people have the right to listen alternatives, to choose any idea, any option from the political parties. Having took these all commitments, the election was conducted democratically. Then the people decided what they want. The current Ethiopian political condition is, it has its own impact on the election, I believe. The people of Tigray have security threat, and the PLF is a kind of party which can stand on, which can defend, properly defend anything against the interests of the people. So I believe the people showed that they are indivisible in the interest of security, in the interest of, even they boldly told the federal government that the people in TPLF are not different. TPLF is elected by 98.3% of the vote. So the cumulative result of all the political parties except TPLF is 1.7% of the voters in the vote. We tried all our best to accommodate them by, as I've said, by amending the constitution, by adopting laws, and by putting some seats to proportional kind of electoral system. 38 of the seats are allotted for that, but they couldn't get any of them, any of it, except Baitona. Yeah, for one seat. So TPLF cannot share any political, any seat to any political party. It has no the mandate. It has no the power.
So where will TPLF get the 37 representatives from? Because they didn't run for the elections, and the people did not vote for the 37 people that did not contest in the election.
People assume that all candidates should be open for election. The system we adopted is another thing. We have 152 seats for an open list, open kind of lists, direct election, and they are open in every constituency. And the 20% of the seats will compete by a closed list. Every party, say Baitona, Salsaoyane, and the Tigray Independence Party, all have their own open list candidates for 152 and closed list for the proportional seats. The proportional seats are only known by the party who nominated. This works for every party. So after the political party took its own share from the proportional seats, it makes disclosed. So the closed list was with TPLF, and it is known by the Electoral Commission. Now, after TPLF won the 37 seats of the proportional one, it has disclosed. So many say that this is a kind of this is not illegal. I think it is because of lack of information, lack of clarity of the law.
What do you mean, lack of clarity of the law? The law is not clear enough?
The law may not be accessible for everyone. The parties are clear. You cannot listen any claim from the parties about the 37, about the share of the 37.
But the law is supposed to be transparent.
Yeah, it should be. It should be, but as you know, the law was adopted a month ago. So it is, the time is very, very narrow, very short, yeah. So it may not be accessible for everyone, and even I heard that there was a confusion even in the commission, the electoral commission.
Amanuel, Assefa, thank you very much for your informative reflections.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Well, we have come to the end of the interview. Thank you for watching, and this is goodbye from me and the technical crew.